That's good stuff. Did you want to take a look at some of the sleeper picks? Because I think I saw a name in chat that
Yeah.
might be on my list. But
Yeah, maybe. But also, I mean, it should also be important to note that this is a very forward-heavy draft.
Mhm.
So it's always difficult to try and gauge the ceiling of these defensive players or defensemen when compared to, there's what, 12 forwards and 3 defensemen that we have in our top 15. I mean, minus Askarov.
Yeah.
So it's a balance of finding the actual ceiling versus, okay, shit, we really need a defenseman.
Well, yeah, that's the thing, right? Like, there's value, and then there's comparative value, right? You don't want to take the third best defender at like pick 11 or 12 if there are 8 forwards that would provide you better value.
Yeah.
Until you get to like where that defenseman should actually be picked. The problem is everyone has a different list and a different definition of value and different criteria to measure value in the first place. So I think that question about like if the defensemen are overhyped because there are so few of them, I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. And I don't know if that's just my personal bias against Jake Sanderson coming into play. But, that does happen. Like we see that all the time, right? And you see it with centers too, where, a center that has less of a impact potential being picked above wingers that have much higher ceilings. And I'm not just talking about Barrett Hayton. There's
the old
tons of
Dylan
examples.
McElrath principle.
Yeah, exactly. So tell me about these guys, Ian, because there are some very interesting names on this list.
Yeah, so I'll start. I mean, I'll do a quick rundown. Just a couple of major names that I'd like to hit. First off, I would 2 things to note. I accidentally put Jack Thompson as a center when he's a right defenseman. So just to clear that up. So that was my mistake. The other thing is I wasn't sure whether or not to put Evan Vierling on this list just because I don't think he's going to be on the board by the 4th round or so. But I'll just talk about 2 players or three players then. Dmitry Ovchinnikov he's played in all kinds of forward positions. He played center a lot for his team in the MHL. I listed him here because I genuinely don't know where he's going to get picked. He on NHL Central Scouting's or the Central Scouting's European list, the final for the European skaters, he was not on that.
Interesting. Like not even listed.
Not even listed. So we'll see. But just an excellent playmaker, very good skater, excellent playmaker. A lot of room to improve. That's why these are sleeper picks, especially in his defensive game. But the offensive skill is there. Briefly, Evan Vierling, fantastic two-way defenseman, two-way center. Very complete game. It's a huge percentage of his points were primary points. So I that's why I wasn't sure about listing him here because I don't think he's going to last past the 3rd round. Michael Benning is to you again. This feels like a lazy comparison, but I'll explain. Very much like a Cale Makar type defenseman, I think. Not in the skill level, but the idea that he's a defenseman from the AJHL that's just a really good skater, and he uses that to his offensive ability. The biggest one that I have on this list, the big name here for me would be Isaac Phillips. That's the kind of like the real X factor here, because Phillips is a big guy, very raw in his game. He had a very large growth spurt over the past year or so, and he's still a very strong skater, very strong. But if he can put that together, I think he could absolutely be a second pairing defenseman. And I put Berezyokin because I do like a good power forward. It is fun to watch. It's just a mean, physical player.
Very nice. Yeah, no, I think that's a nice list, and it's funny because I feel like in the later rounds, the Devils, and we talked about this last summer, Ian, when we did our piece on Nikola Paschik, but they have this kind of type where there are players that have a couple different really raw tool sets, and they can develop in a few different roles. But I don't know if your list is anything like mine, but when I put together my sleeper picks, a lot of the players I put on that were not like that at all, where they had a couple of really interesting skills and they needed to kind of get their butt in gear to work on either their skating or their decision making or whatever. But I feel like at least with like even I think about a player like Arseny Gritsuk was a bit more in terms of like he had some really good like mobility skills and he needed to kind of work on the rest. So I feel like that thought process can still be valid for the Devils, even though they do tend to pick those kind of multi-tool players that just need to basically pick a lane and they can kind of develop in that direction. So
Yeah, and
I
it
like
should
those
also, it should also be noted that Gritsuk had a very good international tournament performance.
Yeah, I remember watching like a shootout. I think it was Russia versus the US, and he had a really nice move. Anything else you want to say about this list?
Well, one other player that I'd like to list would be, I forget how you pronounce it, but William Cool. Just a very much a. You mentioned the idea of Rossi having like a Marchand type meanness flair to him, not
Sure.
in like a dirty play kind of situation, but just an aggressiveness towards
Sandpaper.
getting the puck. Yeah, sandpaper.
Truculence.
Yeah. Brian Burke is now searching your address. Like a
He's the
reverse
patron
IP
saint
search.
of this podcast.
But Coyle is I get like Tom Wilson vibes from him. Just a very just a strong power forward that doesn't take anything, doesn't take any crap.
Nice.
Yeah.
I had a couple names on mine. I also had Jack Thompson down as a center by accident. So it's the same warning applies. And I have a couple overagers on here. And when I talk about players that have a couple singular skills and then need to really work on something else, a few of these people have that. Maybe more so than others, Pavel Gogolev, who is not only an overager, but a double overager. Plays for Guelph in the OHL. And he had a really good year on a Guelph team that's a bit past its prime. And I think he's a player that I think could step into Binghamton next season and be a pretty effective middle six forward, especially as, barring some really big moves this summer, there are going to be a couple kind of bubble players moving up and down between Binghamton and New Jersey. He's a player that I think would be really interesting because he's pretty good on his like his balance. Like he's decent at keeping people away from the puck, and he can really shoot it. I see him as a potentially a really useful player that could, maybe in 2 or 3 years sneak into like a middle six, maybe a bottom six role on the Devils. William Villeneuve out of the Quebec League is another one of those players that is he definitely has a single like a one-track mind, very offensively gifted defenseman, along with Poirier out of the Quebec League that I think is really interesting. James Hardy is a player out of Mississauga, and there are actually 2 steelheads on this list, so you can tell where I live and who I see most often. But Hardy's interesting. He scored like 34 goals this season. Isn't necessarily the biggest play driver. Like his shot is amazing. I wouldn't put it up there with like Quinn or Alexander Holtz, but it is a very good shot. The problem is he doesn't always push the pace of the game and go to the inside of the ice. So I think he's one of those players that if he were to put on like 10 pounds and get just, a bit more courageous, could be like a potentially a really good value pick because he already has this, decent skating. He has the goal scoring ability. If he just adds to kind of those peripheral pieces, he could potentially be a very useful player.
And if he does make the show or whenever we draft him and he goes through one gate to the other, we could call that a Hardy har har.
That might be your worst one yet, and I say that with only love and affection.
They're only going to get worse.
Yeah, the night is young. Callie Klang is a goalie out of Sweden. That is the closest thing I've seen to Dominik Hasek in a long time, because though how aggressive he is out of the net is hilarious, and he has the athleticism to back it up. He's had some interesting international performances. He could be a flyer. Like, the Devils basically take a goaltender every year at the draft, usually in the later rounds these days. He'd be someone that I think would be on the board, round 5, 6, maybe even 7. That could be an interesting value pick if you want to take a swing on a player that still has the potential to grow a couple inches, but has that athleticism and potentially too much bravery for his own good. He'd be an interesting choice. And then the last one,
I had to pause a little bit when you said. I had to pause a little bit when you said, "Yeah, he could be a flyer."
Yeah, no, we don't talk about them on this podcast.
Yeah,
I'm not sure we've ever talked about the Flyers in like 4 years. That's interesting. Last one I'll mention off this list is Bjorkvik Holm, who's another Mississauga Steelhead. He was a high pick in the import draft last season, and he's big. Like, he's like 6'2". He doesn't weigh a lot, and he's a bit timid. So he's the kind of guy that has decent mobility. He makes a good first pass. He's got like decent offensive instincts, but he doesn't play like he's 6'2". Like he's just a bit too timid at the moment to play a kind of smaller North American game. So that's a player that I think would be available at like round 5-ish, plus or minus 1 round. And if you believe in him and you think you could impart a bit more sandpaper into his game, could actually have like third pairing defenseman potential. And in the 5th round, that's about as good as it gets, right? So I think he'd be really interesting.